forward to this session. So I'm really delighted that we all get to spend the next hour with Cherise Fisher, who is an agent at Wendy Sherman Associates. Just a bit about Cherise. She kind of, from what I can gather, rocketed into a career in publishing after graduating from Yale, when she got a job as the assistant to the editor-in-chief of Dell Publishing. And her plan had been to work for 2 to 3 years, then go to law school, become a lawyer, and then an agent. But instead, she worked as a book editor for decades before becoming an agent. In fact, just as an aside, time permitting, Cherise, I'd love to hear more about kind of how agents function as both lawyers and editors.
Yeah.
And whether that should have a bearing on whether on which agents writers approach. But we'll get back to that.
Excellent questions.
So the first book I gather that you edited was Do They Hear You When You Cry by Fauzia Kazinja and Layli Miller-Moreau, and I hope I'm not butchering their names.
Very good. Yeah, no, you're not.
Good. So it was a memoir of the first woman who received asylum in the U.S. On the basis of having suffered female genital, or on the basis of suffered or avoiding female genital. Avoiding.
Thankfully.
Female genital mutilation. As an agent, and I'm quoting from this Cherise, forgive the third person, she wants to work with novelists who have several, quote, compulsively readable yarns in their head. In the nonfiction domain, she'll advocate for memoirs that uncover the diversity of human experience and take on nonfiction writers who are experts on topics such as personal development, health and sexuality, racial identity, Christianity, diet and fitness, African American history, and pop culture. So a really diverse sort of palette. Not incredibly recent New York Times interview, Cherise. You said, I love this. You said, one of the things about being an editor is that you can't publish with cynicism. You have to absolutely believe it's important. The process for working on a book is 9 months, not only of editing, but of telling everybody how important it is. With an approach like that, it's no wonder that you've been a huge draw, not just for this webinar today, but for the writers clamoring to meet with you in advance of the Right Angles Conference. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. I would just ask that the participants here, if questions occur to you as Cherise is talking, just go ahead and put them into the chat. When Cherise is done presenting, she'll be glad to field your questions, and we'll try doing that by either physical hand and or by your raised digital hand, which you can usually find at the bottom of your screen under reactions. Beyond that, I don't think there are any other logistics. So over to you, Cherise.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. It is amazing to be here with all of you this morning. Thank you for showing up. You never know who's going to show up. And I love that I can see a lot of your faces. My big shout out is to someone named Jennifer Jacobson, because I think she might be my Jennifer Jacobson, who I edited several of her books when I was at Simon Schuster, when I was like 12 and a half years old, or maybe a little bit older. So if she's here, I would love for her to wave and say, and tell me, yes, no, I am your Jennifer Jacobson, because I loved working on that series of books. And when I'm talking about my career and the different types of books that I've done, I often mention her book for a very particular reason, but she and I can chat about that later. Anyway, I have prepared a little PowerPoint. I love a little PowerPoint. It keeps me on track. As Julie said, you should feel free to ask questions in the chat as I'm speaking. I am going to ignore them because I want to get through everything that I have to say. Sometimes you'll ask a question. Sometimes that question will be answered during the process. And also I get easily distracted. So I'm going to be sort of focused on the PowerPoint. And then we'll look at the questions, but most importantly is for you to raise your hand and ask me questions so I know who is asking them. So I am going, wow, I wish I was that Jennifer. I can't believe you're not that Jennifer Jacobson. That's crazy. Okay. I'm glad to
maybe you will be.
I'm glad to have you here anyway. I'm going to share my screen. We tested this out before we started. So hopefully this should be a painless process. Can everybody see this? Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can? Thank
Yeah.
you so much. So here we are, how to write a query letter. Um, and I'm Cherise. Hi, how are you? Um, Today's agenda, we're going to talk about what the purpose is of a query letter. What is the purpose of a query letter? What are the components of a query letter? What are some of the common mistakes to avoid when writing and sending a query letter? And then we'll have time for questions and answers. Julie, so we have an hour or do we have an hour and a half? I don't remember.
Uh, I believe we have an hour, but Becky,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong.
We are booked until 11:30.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. So we have an
okay.
hour and a half. Right.
Okay. So then I can be kind of chatty as opposed to very, but I'm gonna try and leave about 15, 20 minutes for questions, maybe even more. We'll see how chatty I get. But I do want to answer your question. So this is today's agenda. Um, I had a lovely introduction by Julie. It's always so funny to me when people remind me of things that I've said like years ago. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I still quite very much believe that. And so thank you for doing your extra research, Julie. We will talk about research later on. So she's given you kind of who I am, the big sketch. I started in publishing in 1994. I think, Julie, you used the phrase that I jetted into the publishing industry because I think that the assistant to the editor-in-chief sounds very fancy. It's not fancy. It is absolutely about sitting outside somebody's office, answering phone calls, calling her car, making her lunch reservations, all of those filing, um, Xeroxing, and typing up letters. Like that's how long ago. There wasn't email when I first started in 1994. And so now I look at young editors who have email. They don't even know what a fax machine is practically. It's just a very, very different world. And it was a world pre-Amazon. So it was an entirely different publishing world. But I'm really grateful for having that introduction because it makes you sort of attached to the basics of publishing and the basics of which is basically about the readers. Um, so I'm very grateful for my early start in publishing. But in 1994, I started working. I was the assistant to the editor-in-chief. I later became an editor at Touchstone Fireside, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster. I don't know, how long was I there? From 1998 maybe until 2006, something like that. I was there for a good bulk of my career, going from associate editor to senior editor. And then I left Simon and Schuster and went to work as the editor-in-chief of Plume, which is an imprint of Penguin. Before it was Penguin Random House, it was Penguin. And there was an imprint there called Plume. It was mostly a trade paperback imprint, and I was the editor-in-chief there. And then I proceeded to have two babies back to back, and started doing freelance editing, and made my way to a literary agent. There's a longer story there about how I always actually intended to be a literary agent. Julie referred to that earlier. But that's another story for another time. So I've been a literary agent, I think, for 8 years now. Um, I've been happy in every stage of my career because I feel as though I've done good work in every stage of my career. But this is like the most juicy, wonderful role I've ever had. And everything that I have learned um, from Xeroxing, from sitting outside of my boss's office, all the way to being the editor-in-chief of Plume, all of those experiences have made me into the type of agent that I am today, because agents come in different flavors. But yes, I'm a literary agent. And I'm also a frequent guest and workshop leader at writers' conferences, um, like this one. I've always done them from the very beginning. I always saw that as like good karma, because when you're an editor, you spend a lot of time um, turning down manuscripts, right? And oftentimes, because you're flooded with so much information and so many projects and so many pitches, you don't really have the time to explain properly why you cannot do X, Y, or Z. And writers' conferences was always a way for me to remain connected to writers and for me to kind of even up all of those rejections that I send out by actually giving some helpful information to people who are on this journey. So I love doing these workshops. I hardly ever say no to them, and I'm very glad I said yes to this one. So all of this means, for your purposes of this conversation, that I have seen a lot of query letters, right? As the assistant to the editor-in-chief, of course, I was the first one to open any package that came into her and read that query letter. Obviously, as an editor, I got a lot of query letters from literary agents, but we'll talk about how your query letter is actually a template for your agent's pitch letter, and is a template often for the back cover copy on your eventual book. It's a really important foundation, right, for your book. Obviously, as a literary agent, I see a whole bunch of query letters. Not so much anymore because I'm closed to queries unless I meet you at a writers conference. But my assistant goes to a lot of query letters, and we are getting, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 a week probably. Um, the principal agent at our agency, Wendy Sherman, she probably gets even more than that. I say this to say that we get a lot of query letters, and I've seen a lot of query letters. And so it is very simple for you to go on the Googles, and a light search will give you some ideas about what a query letter includes. But in this conversation, I want to give you information on query letters that are going to get you to the next step. So yes, my intention today is to how to help you write an effective query letter. And an effective query letter is one that gets you to that next step. And what is the next step? The next step is someone saying, I'd like to read more. That's all it is. I mean, I think that a lot of times when people are sitting down, they have this dream of writing a book. You know, they go from a blank computer screen to seeing a book in a bookstore, or to stand in front of an audience of 3,000 people talking about your book. I think people make that leap, and that's a huge leap. And it's not actually very helpful in you getting stimulated into doing something. I really like to, it's like a big elephant, you know? I had a coach one time, and you've probably heard this expression, but a coach once told me, how do you get, he asked me, how do you eat an elephant? And I was like, oh no, you know, I was thinking, a little salt, do you boil it first to soften it? You know, is it grilled? Like, what do you do? How do you eat an elephant? I don't know. He said, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, one bite at a time. And so this conversation about a query letter is that it's that first bite. And the only thing that you're trying to get to with your query letter is simply, I'd like to read more. I think we invest all of this stuff, right, into a query letter. If I write this right query letter, I'm going to win a Nobel Prize in literature in 5 years. Don't go there, right? All your query letter has to do is to let the other person, is to have the response of the other person saying, I'd like to read more, if that makes sense. Okay, so what is a query letter? So throughout this, I'm going to give you kind of like very basic information, which you need, and then we're going to elevate it, okay? So a query letter, it's the letter you write to a literary agent with the hope that they will represent you, right? But what does a query letter actually represent? Right? A lot of this is about just having a little bit of a mind shift, a little bit of a pivot, right, in order to become effective. So what does a query letter represent? It represents your shift from writer to author. It's a mental shift. It's when a writer has a manuscript, a writer has something that they have written, an author has a book, right? And a book is something that you sell, or that you make available for as many people as possible. It's going from my project to a product. And this is actually extremely challenging for most of us, right? Because you've had some form of inspiration from somewhere that has encouraged you, urged you, propelled you to sit at your desk in front of a computer, in front of a typewriter, in front of a pad with a pencil. And you've created something that has sprung up from your mind, or your imagination. And I call that the writer's cave. And I think that the writer's cave is a really important space. I think it's really important to sit with your own thoughts, with your own imagination, with your own inspiration, and create something without distractions. And distraction, I mean pressure for it to be something more than it is, right? Be in the cave, write the thing, love the process of writing the thing, and then peek out of your cave, right? Peek out of your cave and invite other people to read it. Peek out of your cave and come to a workshop on how to get to the next step. Um, Invite people into the process. And then there's that shift where it's not just something that I'm working on that I think is precious and important. It is something that I want to share with somebody else. There's a quote, I'm not going to quote it correctly in this moment. I should have looked for it before I got on the phone, but it's like, a writer, a book is something that's in relationship. It's a relationship between a writer and a reader, that you have to have a reader in order for it to be a book. And it's a kind of shift in the way you think of it. Part of why it's so challenging is that when you're in that writer's cave and you're creating something, you're only answering to yourself and you're doing it for, in your mind, some higher reason. When you're talking about a book, you're talking about something that's going to be in relationship with other people. And you're trying to understand what your book looks like in the full library of books that there are in the world. You are trying to understand how to talk about yourself as a sales partner, as opposed to someone who created something, right? So that's a really important mind shift, which is actually going to direct a lot of my elevated tips for you. That shift from writer to author, that person who understands what my project is and how to shape it into a product. And not only is my book the product, but I am the product as well. So the basic components of a query letter: you're going to have an introductory paragraph, you're going to have a description of the book, and you're going to have a short bio, of the author, your bio of the author. Those are the basic components of a query letter. That is the kind of information an agent is going to need in order to decide whether or not they're going to take you on or if they're going to read more. I'd like you to think about the components of an effective query letter. Still 3 paragraphs and the same 3 paragraphs, but here's the actual extra sprinkling, right, of magic. Your first paragraph is, why you, dear reader? Meaning, why am I writing to you? We're going to break this down a little bit more, but I want you to keep these things in mind. Why you, dear reader? What does my book do? What my book does, right? There's a description of a book that's actually static, but there's also, what does my book do in the world? We'll break that down. And then the last one is, why me? Which is more than a bio. Why me is more than a bio. We're going to get to that. So that first paragraph, the basics. So you want a title of your project. You want a genre. Is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? Is it historical fiction? Is it contemporary fiction? Is it a mystery? Is it a romance? Is it an investigative journalism? Is it a memoir? That's genre. Do I want you to get really fussy and obsessive about genres? And I know I'm going to be asked this question, like, well, am I an upmarket literary fiction? Am I commercial women's fiction? Blah, blah, blah. All that stuff is really fussing. I would not say that you worry about it, but the basics of what this book is, fiction or nonfiction, the basics of the type of novel it is, maybe it's sci-fi, maybe it's mystery, maybe it's romance. You want that in that first introductory paragraph after dear so-and-so. And word length. Word length is there because, if I'm writing about the history of Greek mythology, whether or not I'm writing 200,000 words or whether I'm writing 80,000 words is going to give a signal to what kind of approach it is to the history of Greek literature. Now, let's elevate it. Why you? The opening sentences of a query letter should somehow communicate to the person reading it that you are writing to them in particular. And you're writing to them in particular for a certain reason. So query letters should be tailored, especially that first paragraph, to who is supposed to receive this query letter. That's not to say you're not going to have a full basic query letter, but that's where I want you to personalize it. I want you to research the person that you're writing before you even sit down to write it. Understand what other books that they've done, understand what books they have that they're interested in. And as Julie did, a light Google search, she found an interview about me from an interview of me in the New York Times from 2020. And any agent worth their salt and sugar is someone who you can run a Google on, is someone who has done interviews. You might have a relationship with a particular author who is recommending you to that agent. That is what you put in here. I am writing to you because Tia Williams' book, 7 Days in June, changed my life. I love the way she did X, Y, and Z, and my book does the same thing. Why are we going through all that? Because I'm not, but most agents are reading 30 to 40 query letters a day, right? And so it is a relationship, the relationship between a writer and an agent. It is a relationship. I call it a work marriage. And when you're dating somebody, you want to flatter them. And it's not flatter in a sort of superficial way, but you want to sit down in front of them and say, gosh, you smell good, right? Or, you look beautiful today. You want them to have a sense of like, I want you in particular. I'm not just here for anybody to help me get what I want. I'm particularly choosing you because I like the types of books you do, because I like that in a workshop that you did in 2024, you described this in this way. I like that your bio says that you hope that books maximize joy in your life, and that's completely aligned. An agent, me in particular, but I think many agents want to have a sense that you know that you can be aligned with them for a variety of reasons, right? So why am I writing to you in particular? That is based on some research you have done on that person, and tailoring that first paragraph to them helps me do what? Read more of your letter. I'm going to have a list of common mistakes to make, but like a primary mistake is Dear Agent. I get an email that says Dear Agent. I mean, Jesus Christ might have written that letter. I'm going to put it in the trash, because what do you mean, Dear Agent? You have no idea who I am. And you're just in it to be in it, but you're not being intentional or purposeful. And is this going to be something that's particularly good fit with me? I don't know. But if you sort of convince me in that first chapter that it is something that you in particular would be interested in, I'm inclined to read more. That all makes sense. That second paragraph, it's a description of the book you've written. How do we elevate that? It is, what will this book do? Right? And what do I mean by that? I think that all books have a primary purpose. Each book has a primary purpose to it. Some are intended to inspire, some are intended to educate, some are intended to entertain, right? So in the process of you having a real deep understanding of what your book, you should be able to answer that question. I am writing this, I've written this memoir called Do They Hear You When You Cry, to educate people about how the United States government at that particular time treated illegal immigrants who came into this country seeking asylum. That could have been their primary issue. Or I'm writing this memoir because I was a 14-year-old, 15-year-old African girl who fled everything that I knew before. My assistant, who's also my daughter, just wanted me to bring you this. This is literally the first book that I ever edited, Do They Hear You When You Cry, in hardcover. It's still in print. It makes me very, very happy. So I keep it close to me. Thank you, Nina. So I could share that with you. So yeah, but her book is also, primary purpose is to inspire people to reach beyond what their comfort level is in order for freedom, right? I have this book, A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, which just came out in February, which is about a young, scattered woman who is a member of a big iconic family, but she's never quite fit in. They own a string of funeral homes, if you can believe it, and she's never quite fit in with them. She's sort of the black sheep of the family. And she gets the opportunity to move from Atlanta, where she's always lived her life, to Harlem to open up a flower shop, which is her true, true dream. And when she does this, she meets an enigmatic stranger who is a musician. And there's something that really blocks them from being together, big something that blocks them from being together. Antics ensue, right? Um, it's a totally entertaining, beautiful book, which along the way educates you about the Harlem Renaissance and about voodoo, which could be inspiring to anybody, but her primary purpose was to entertain. Okay, so you as the writer have to have a sense of, what does my book do? Does it inspire? Does it educate? Does it entertain? Right? Is it humorous? Is it uncovering something that nobody else knows about? Is it meant to wring a tear out of your eye, right? And once you know that, that second paragraph has to do it, right? So if the book is to educate the reader, I, the person reading it, want to learn something that I didn't know before. If the book is meant to entertain me, then the storytelling in that description has to be top notch, because every editor and every agent, there's one thing that we all have in common: we love a story, we love a good book. And although in the path of querying agents and getting rejections, it may feel like nobody wants this, I promise you, I've been in this industry since I was 21 years old. And anytime I opened a box, because back in the day, they used to mail the actual manuscripts to the office, but anytime I opened a box, anytime now that I open an email, I actually want to read something that takes me away, that transports me, right? And so that is my intention. Now I'm going to get to the point where I'm like, this is not doing it for me. And then it's not for me. But we love reading. And so give us something that will make us go into that world. If your intention is to inspire, if it's just like, yeah, like a heartrending story, maybe there might be a little something behind my eyes after I read your second paragraph. That is your goal. Understand what your book's primary role is and make sure that it's in that second chapter. Also, who is this book for? Do you have a sense of who your audience is? And how do you communicate that you know that who your audience is? Because you might compare your book at the end of that second chapter. Because remember, I want you in those first sentences to get me into a story, to get me into a character, to get me into a situation. And if it's a nonfiction book, because I don't know if most people hear fiction, nonfiction, memoir, whichever, but I will just say, if it's a nonfiction book, you want to describe a problem and describe a solution to the problem, which will absolutely be about who the book is for. So you want to say to myself, you want to say in some way in that second paragraph, my reader has these other books on their shelf. All of publishing, here's a big secret. All of publishing is about comparative titles. Nothing in publishing is inventive, magical, or forward-thinking. Publishers publish what they have published before. There's a new messenger, there's a new approach, there might be a slight tweak, but publishers, which are huge businesses that have to keep lights on and that have to keep employees employed, they want to be able to know that this book is going to sell. And how they know that this book is likely to sell is to know that there are people who have already bought similar books, but you have a different approach. So yes, in that second paragraph, to elevate it, I want something in there that helps me understand that you know where your book fits in on the big, wide range of books, and that you know who your audience is, you know who your reader is, and so you can be a great partner in discovering that reader. There's more to that in the third paragraph. Your third paragraph is your bio, your credentials as a writer, your education, maybe some awards, your professional background. But in elevating that third paragraph, I want you to think about it as, why should you bet on me? That's what you're asking this agent, to bet on you. And then ultimately to a publisher, to bet on you as a partner, bet on you as somebody who is actually going to get this done. But more importantly, know that you are somebody who knows your audience and knows how to get the book to the next step. I personally like to see an author's relationship to the story. Obviously, with a memoir, you know what the relationship to the story is, right? There was a book that a friend of mine wrote. Oh my goodness, am I not going to remember the title of it? I'm not going to remember the title of it. But it was a book about there was a group of Japanese young girls who were brought to the United States very, very like in the 1920s or something, and as sort of a cultural experiment. And when they returned to Japan, one opened up an all-girls school and different things. A woman named Janice Pomerantz, I know her as Janice Pomerantz because I knew her before she was married. He wrote this book, and you're like, well, how does this girl from the Upper East Side write this book about these Japanese girls? Well, it so happened that she went to college, met a Japanese boy, fell in love with him. And so her relationship to the story, she also went to an all-girls school, a very well-known and prestigious all-girls school. Her relationship to the story was in many ways that she is living this cross-Japanese American life now, that she has a half Japanese daughter, that that the all girls school that was in Japan has a relationship to the all girls school that she went to, right? She had a relationship to the story in that way. There was a book that I published. Oh my gosh, am I going to forget her name? She was like a comedic actress. Oh my goodness, I could see the cover and everything. But she wrote this book about it's called Belly Laughs. Maybe Jenny McCarthy, maybe is her name. The book was called Belly Laughs, which was her experience of being this like sexy bombshell who had this baby, right? And it was funny and it was light. And then eventually this baby grew up and she realized that the baby was on the autism spectrum. And she did a whole bunch of research about how to reverse the effects of autism on her child. And so it's Jenny McCarthy. She went on to write several books about her son, not only her son's autism, but her struggle or her challenge and her ultimate triumph in reversing the effects of autism on her child. That was her relationship to the story. One of my authors, Sadiqa Johnson, not this particular book, although this book has that element too, but she wrote a book called The Yellow Wife, which was about an enslaved biracial woman in 1850s Richmond, Virginia, who lived on it wasn't a plantation, it was a slave jail where people would trade in slaves, where slaves were sent to be punished. And she was the mistress of the house with a man who was both her master and her lover, so to speak. Other people wouldn't call it a lover, but she was the mistress of the house. My author, what is her relationship to the story? She was somebody who wrote contemporary fiction. Her relationship to the story was simply that she moved to Richmond, Virginia. She was taking a walk on one of those historical marked trails, and she came upon the setting, where this was. Like the marker was, here was the famous Lapierre jail, the most infamous slave jail in antebellum South, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she said when she was in that space and she looked at the space, she realized that this acre was very similar, his half acre, excuse me, was very similar to the half acre of her new house. And she said that she was in that space and she felt the spirits of enslaved ancestors speaking to her. She became so curious about who was this woman who lived on a space of land very similar to the space of land that I live in. Where did she come from? How did she manage being a Black woman herself, an enslaved person herself, with this man who was a monster by every historical document? He was a monstrous, cruel human being, but he was very kind to her, and he was very kind to their children. How did she adjust with that? And so Sadiqa just felt that story on her body, and her way into that story was to understand who was I? Who could I have been back then? What is your relationship to the story is about establishing for the person reading it, what is the source of your passion? Where did this story come from? And in what way are you passionate about it? One reason why this is so key, I think, is because the road to publication is a very, very long road, and something bigger than yourself has to fuel it. A passion bigger than yourself has to fuel it. And then on another level, your relationship to the story is a part of what will become the press release for your story, always, right? It's like, and then that's about the partnership between you and how this book gets into the audience. Because there's one thing to go to a book signing, and I'm in a chair that always sinks down, so I'm going to shift it up so back in view. I've been, obviously, Sadiqa is my client. I've been to a lot of her talks, and you've gone to a talk for a book, right? Where the author stands in front, smiles, smells good, and reads a part of their book to you. But you've also, I'm sure, I hope, have been to a book signing where the author inspires you and challenges you and shares something with you about the book that you wouldn't get from just reading it, which makes the book all that more delicious. So what is your relationship to your story? And of course, what is your platform, right? Because why should you bet on me? Well, you should bet on me because I have the secret sauce on how to find my reader, how to inspire my reader, because I already have a relationship with my reader, whether it's from a Substack, whether it's from a blog, whether it's from an affiliation with, I've written this book about how to overcome trauma. And I am the president of the board of trauma therapists, right? What is your relationship to your readers? What kinds of communication? How do people come to you for this particular type of information? Disappointing Affirmations is a very funny book about disappointing affirmations. And it is designed to look like a really straight up inspirational book, but you open it up and it has things like an affirmation, a classic affirmation on here is you are more than enough. Wait, no, I'm not going to do one that has a curse in it for this audience. Who you are now is not who you will be in 5 years. Here's hoping you're not even worse. Like, it's very funny and people love it. When I met him, he had about 100,000 followers in IG. A year later, he has 2 million followers in IG, right? So his platform, which is on social media, is one in which people are accustomed, like they want to laugh, they go to his page, or they laugh every time it shows up in their timeline. That happened to be his platform. And his message is particularly his. And so that's how we make this book a distinct item that some people want to buy. It's coming out next week. We're going out with huge numbers, booksellers love it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is your relationship with your reader? What is your platform? I think for novelists, it's like, what platform? I sat here and I wrote a book. I sat here and I wrote a mystery. I sat here and I wrote a romance. I want you to think about what your relationship is with other writers. What I love to see in that third paragraph, an elevated third paragraph, is I'm a screenwriter in LA, and I have a writers group with 5 other screenwriters. I studied under Toni Morrison. I I started a writers conference in Tennessee that has grown to X, Y, and Z. You actually have a relationship with other writers and other authors who are people who introduce you to agents, introduce you to publishers, but also who will be there to give you an early quote on your book. Things like that. That's a part of your writer's platform. Obviously, if you are writing a book about how to improve your eyesight through diet, of course, I want to know that you are studied nutrition. I would love to know that you have healed countless people. I also want to know that you are you attend the ophthalmologist, the National Conference of Ophthalmologists every year, and that you have been their keynote speaker 2 years in the running, and will likely be in the third, if that makes sense. Common mistakes to avoid: addressing the letter incorrectly. I have gotten letters that said, "Dear Mr. Fisher." I'm not Mr. Fisher. I have gotten letters that say, "Dear Agent." Means nothing, right? Spelling errors, excuse me, and grammar mistakes. Common mistakes to avoid, easy mistake to avoid. Throwing everything in this letter but the kitchen sink. Oh, now why did that happen? My TV just went on for no reason. Throwing everything into this letter but the kitchen sink. I want you to be clear and I want you to be succinct. Addressing the letter incorrectly, spelling errors, grammar mistakes, overstuffing a letter. What that does is take me away from what you're trying to say. Sorry, and over focus on how you're making a mess of saying it. I've had a nagging cough for 2 weeks. I almost got away with not coughing through this, but here we are.
Do you need to take a minute, Cherise?
No, I'm gonna drink.
Okay, while you're drinking, I'm just going to jump in and say something because I know half the people on this call are thinking, oh, when I submitted my query letter for my meeting with Cherise or any other agent, it just says, "Dear Agent." And that is because we asked you to submit your query letters before knowing who you were going to meet with. So rest assured that we will assure the agent of that you're not a slacker, that you had no choice but to write "Dear Agent."
Yes, you're right. And Dear Agent in this context is a little different from sending me something in an email 4 weeks from now, right? But those top 3 bullets, like I said, it takes me as a reader away from what you're trying to say and over focus on how you're saying it and how you're messing it up. You don't want that. You know, if I see spelling errors and grammar mistakes now, what on earth it's not a great first impression. It's certainly going to make me believe that your manuscript will also have spelling errors or grammar mistakes. If you're putting everything but the kitchen sink in it, then you're not being clear and direct about what should be in this book. Clear and direct makes it a seamless read to me, right? For me, for the agent. No gimmicks, no gimmicks. Don't send me food. Don't send me flowers. Except on Valentine's Day. Don't send me, the ashes from your great grandmother's grave. Like, no gimmicks. Because as an agent, if the only thing that's making me read it is that I have some mysterious dust in it, I know I can't send mysterious dust to editors, right? So the book has to stand on what it is and not on a gimmick. I think a mistake also to avoid is querying too early, because what we said at the beginning was simply this. The next step is, I want to read more. So if you sent me a query, but you don't have anything to send me, when I say I want to read more, what are you going to send me? Then you come back and you say, oh, I actually haven't finished it. Or I need to do another 2 drafts, right? What is the purpose of that? You're wasting your time. Querying too early. Common mistakes. It is a long road. Querying agents is a long process. It's a process of research, writing, submitting, waiting, getting rejection, starting over, doing it multiple times. You'll question yourself throughout. But it's a long road that has a possible happy ending. And that's what I want you to hold on to. And in the meantime, just enjoy the journey of doing it. Manage the long wait by constantly growing as a writer, constantly growing as a potential author, by learning as much as you can about the business. And manage rejection simply by knowing that every no brings you closer to what it should be. No's are gifts. Even me as an agent, I have a proposal, I have a novel, I'm sending it out to a bunch of editors, excuse me, and I'm getting no's. You know what I love? I love a quick no, because that quick no means that, like, moving up. I'm getting closer to the person who is going to say yes. So let's have some questions, because I've got some answers. I'm going to stop my share and I think let people raise their hand, and I'll go through that, and then we'll also check whatever questions there are in the chat.
So Grant seems to have his hand up.
Okay.
I've got a lot of questions, but the one I'll start with is a very simple one. Is you're talking about email. Are post office queries a no-no these days?
Yes.
I figured.
Why?
Just want to make
Because
sure. I will say one.
yeah, I'm gonna say no, which is enough of an answer, but I want to explain a little bit more by saying that since 2020, agents are all over the place. I am currently in my home office, books, files, printer, right? And I make it into my office in Chelsea once every 2 weeks. So the other complication about having stuff in the mail is like, where does it go for me to actually read it? But also, then I have something I have to do something with. So I think on my website page, it's like, if you send it to us, don't expect it back. You know, people send me like books, or they'll send me, one time a guy sent me, it was an illustrated book. So he sent me like the illustrations on this big, beautiful thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to send this back to him. Don't add that additional burden. Next question.
Let me just suggest, as I'm looking around for hands, you can raise your physical hand, but also raise your electronic hand via reactions. And we will get to the questions in the chat as well. Whitney?
Hi, thanks for taking the question. I'm just wondering, as far as the purpose of your book, you mentioned, powerful verbs like educate, entertain, inspire. For a novelist who's maybe not necessarily that focused on, an outcome that they want to produce, more of an experience they want to create for their reader, what would you suggest? How would you suggest phrasing that?
Replicate the experience.
Mm.
Right. You got it. The experience. I want my reader to have a certain experience. So what in the text will give me that experience in that second paragraph? Is it a sense of place? Is it a sense of camaraderie? Is it a sense of grief? Is it a sense of joy? Obviously you're telling me a little bit about the story. But if it's a sense of place, right, then you're going to talk about the setting, right? Perhaps. If it is about grief, you're going to actually talk about the character and one's connection to the character. Yeah. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. This is so helpful. My question is about comp titles. I'm wondering if you have advice for how far back they can go, like how old the books can be.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely
you.
do. So these days in publishing, particularly for a nonfiction book proposal, a publisher only wants comp titles that are about 3 years old, 2 to 3 years old. I think that's really a complicated thing these days because we were in the middle of a pandemic. So you want to compare your book with books that are successful, that have been published within the past 2 to 3 years. In a query letter to an agent, I can be a little bit more flexible, right? Because sometimes you might have a book that's a comparative title that's really helping me understand like how you see your book or the message of the book, right? So you might have let me think. You might have a book that is similar to your book in terms of the subject, similar to your book in terms of who is the messenger, or similar to your book in terms of the approach. And in that case, you might be able to go out in a query letter to an agent. You might be able to go a little bit deeper than 3 to 4 years, because let's say The Joy of Sex, right? Just popped into my head, is this iconic illustrated book that shows sex positions and has dominated that type of book forever. And there was this other book called, I remember this, there was a book called Sex is Fun, which was also illustrated books about sex positions, but instead of like those classic drawings that are in The Joy of Sex, it was like a graphic novel, and more cartoony, which was kind of an update, right? And so in your query letter, you might say, like the way The Joy of Sex opened up, blah, 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 my book is a more modern approach, right? So your comp title can be a comp title in several different ways, either by subject, either by author, or by sensibility or style, something like that. And you can be a little bit broader, but for an agent sending it to a publisher, they're going to stay within 2 to 3 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's next? Shall we go to the chat, Julie?
Oh, actually, I just saw a raised hand, Rachel. And then I think we can go to the chat.
Hi, thank you. I just want to follow up on that question. Would you lay that out in the query, the specific ways in which your book is similar to the comparable titles? Or
Yeah,
just in the thinking about being succinct, like, do you want to err towards being succinct or to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I had a reaction to your word layout. Right? When you said layout, I was like, oh, that sounds like 3 sentences. No. One sentence. That's why we just can get into a sentence and pour over it to make it better and better. I think that you can manage that in one good sentence. I also think that, I mean, obviously, you're sending it to an agent who, let's go back to Joy of Sex and Sex is Fun. I don't know why, but let's go back to that. With The Joy of Sex, you're sending it to an agent who's not going to need you will not need to explain to the correct agent what the joy of sex is, right? So Joy of Sex is actually, the title itself is a shorthand. And then so then your sentence is really about a modern adaptation. Sex is Fun is a modern adaptation of Joy of Sex. That makes sense, right? So you're choosing a title that might be, if your title is older, you're choosing a title that is so common that it's a shortcut. It comes with a whole bunch of meaning to the person who sees the title. And so then your book is just kind of, the way you finish the sentence is describing what its relationship is to that original book. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So we might want to try to choose books that are not obscure. So
Not obscure.
Yeah.
you know, if you're going to go beyond that 2 to 3, 4 year thing, because that's the most defining thing about your book, right? But also having a sense, not necessarily for this first query letter, but for further conversation, what other books that are similar to yours are.
Mhm.
You should have that in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Shall we go to the chat, Julie?
I think Rick has his hand up, so let's let
Okay.
him and then we go chat. How's that?
How many words are you looking for?
How many words gonna get the job done, Rick?
Well, yeah, but you know, somebody goes on for 2 pages, you're gonna throw it away. If they're going for
Yeah.
like
Yes.
3
Just
sentences,
not
you're gonna
getting
throw
to
it
the
away.
point. Yeah. If you're going on for 3 to 4 pages, then
I
why?
don't, yeah, that's, yeah.
So again, you're thinking about the person on the other side, and you're thinking about 3 paragraphs. Am I gonna say that's 200 words? Am I gonna say that's 500 words? Am I gonna say it's 900 words? I don't know. But how are you communicating those 3 things that I talked about
Yeah,
in a succinct way? Because you don't want me to spend my whole life reading a query letter that I feel like, well, what do I need to read the book for, right? You just want to be focused. No word count. Mm-mm.
would you like a cough drop?
I have them in my water. And if you could get that cough drop to me right now from wherever you are, then you're a magician and we need to talk.
Okay, I think we can go to the chat, Cherise.
Okay. Let's see. What do we have in here? Oh, Jennifer's not my Jennifer. I wish you were. I feel like I should call her now. Daughters of the Samurai. Yes, Kate. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. That was the title of my friend's book. I can't believe I couldn't remember that. Should all letters be sent with Ms., Mr., or full name, full first name, last name? When referencing other works, how recent should they be? Okay, we answered that question. You know, Ms., Mr., all that stuff is so loaded these days, given how gender fluid everybody is. I think that it's safe to do Ms. last name, Mr. last name. I think that's safe. I would not be turned off by someone saying, Dear Cherise, but you might risk someone being like, well, that's awfully familiar. I think that when you are researching the person, you're listening to them talk, you're seeing how other people refer to them, maybe that's going to be your best indication of how to approach that subject. It would be helpful to have a bit more info on what everything but the chicken sink means, because I'm not sure whether my query letter is succinct enough or whether it's veering into this kitchen sink territory. So I want you to think about this query letter as something that's going to get an immediate sticky response. I want every sentence to play a role, but I want there to be a clarity of message, a singular message. The things that we remember are the things that are singular, that are succinct. Kitchen sink is, I am going to, in that second paragraph, tell you about the history of this character, and then I'm going to tell you about the themes in the book, and then I'm going to throw in the same paragraph the setting and why that's important. No, pick one thing, because what do you want me to focus on? Do you want me to focus on the character? Do you want me to focus on the theme? Do you want me to focus on your language? Pick the one thing that's singular, that's the most important, that is the most selling. Again, it's about taking yourself away from the product you've done and understanding what's the most appealing thing about my book, and then using that. So everything else is extraneous. I just want you to think about it being singular, having a singular message, because that's the stickiest thing, stickiest for the person reading it. When would you recommend giving up on getting an agent and trying small press contests or self-publishing? Good question. How many unsuccessful queries should you give it before deciding it's probably not going to happen? Well, okay, I would say that self-publishing is a very viable plan B for many people. I think the decision about going the traditional route or going the self-published route has a lot more to do with who you are as a person and what types of skills you have, and what you want out of the publishing experience. So if you are someone who is craving critical response, if you are someone who wants your book as a physical form in a bookstore, if you're one who wants people to be able to walk into any bookstore and get a copy of the book or at least request the book, if you're someone who craves, I said, critical reception, all of those things suggest to me that you're going to be traditionally published. If you are someone who is trying to extend your brand, if you're someone who the most important reader for you is your grandchildren, or your great grandchildren, if you imagine yourself with a book that is in front of an audience and that you're going to walk after you give a speech, you're going to go to the back of the room and sell the book, those might suggest that you are self-publishing is the path for you. So it's not so much like self-publishing is because I've failed at getting a traditional publisher. There's a particular type of person who should self-publish depending on what they want from the book experience and depending on what types of skills they have. So Sadiqa Johnson, her first book was self-published. She had she queried and queried. Well, it took her 10 years to write the book. It took her, I don't know, 2 years to find an agent. That agent submitted it to, I don't know, over 10, 15 editors, rejection, 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 rejection. But she was getting really close every time. It was like, well, the editor really liked it, but it didn't pass board. An editor thought that it was an admirable, suggested a revision. She was getting closer to that goal. But at that point, she was like, hold on. I've worked on this for 10 years. I've gotten an agent. My agent has done her best. But you know what? Like I was a publicist. Sadiq was actually a publicist for J.K. Rowling. She was a publicist for T.D. Jakes. She was a publisher for Bebe Moore Campbell. So she knew a little bit about doing publicity on a book. And she and her husband have a very entrepreneurial spirit, right? They had started businesses before. She had time on her hand. You know, she's the mother of 3 children, but she stayed at home with them. And now they were like 10, 12, and 15. So she had time in her schedule. So she had certain skills and a certain capacity to be a self-published author. And so she self-published her first book. She did an amazing job with publicity. She drove up and down the East Coast to every single book fair, selling this book out of her trunk. She met a lot of writers, befriended a lot of writers. So that when she wrote her second book, Second House from the Corner, I was like, you know, let's try again. I cannot recommend a particular when you should give up. I personally can't recommend that because that's only something that you can answer. But I will tell you that some people are designed for self-publishing and some people are not. For some people, writing this book, self-publishing is the best path because of what their capacity is, because of what their skills are. And for some people, it's not. There is no magic number. It's something that you ask yourself. How many unsuccessful queries should you give it? Here's what I want to say to that too. Your query letter is not a static thing. So you write it and you send it out and it works or it doesn't work, but maybe along the way you are continuing to develop what that query letter is. Maybe along the way you are reapproaching certain aspects of it so that you can see, how can I make this more successful? What's holding me back from getting, I'd like to read more? And that's maybe sharing it in a writer's conference with other people, workshopping it with somebody else, hiring someone who is a professional editor. All of those things are ways for you to help shape your query letter. I don't want you to think about it as a stagnant thing. It's something that can evolve and get you closer to your next step. Should we go to the next question, Julie? Yeah? What is the
Yes.
best way to research and find a literary agent? I do think that knowledge of self, right, is the most important thing. So like I've finished this book and I know what my book is and I know where it fits in the world. And next to my book in the future will be these books by these authors who have been successful at reaching the audience that I want, or my book is similar to their book in their way. Well, who is the agent for those books? Who represented those books? That's a really great place to start. Because that person has, by having represented the book that you think is great and that you think is similar to yours and that you think addresses the same audience as your book, that person has success doing it and they would like to continue maintaining success doing that, right? And so that is a really good target for you. But of course, you're going to learn about that person through your research. And what is the best way? Good old Google is a really good way. Going to their website is a must. Going to their IG page, extremely helpful. Following them on X or Twitter or whatever it's called now is a really good way. There's also Publishers Marketplace or Publishers what is it called? Publishers Marketplace, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Publishers Marketplace is a online, what would you call it, Julie? It's not a magazine.
Oh, it's like a database, really.
Like a database of all agents. It's a subscription based. I think part of it is free, but if you take the subscription, you're going to see you can actually organize, all the agents are listed there. A lot of agents go on there to describe what they have sold recently and what the category is. And so that's a really good place. I think it's worth doing a subscription for a year to really understand what agents are like and what they're doing and what they're requiring. Do you look at social media? At what point when you ask for more? If you do, what are you looking for? So because I have been in this industry pre-social media, I tend to be very old school about it and fiercely so. I don't think social media should make or break a client or an author. I think that you're looking at a platform as a whole. You know, I remind people every day that IG is nothing that you own. Neither is Facebook, neither is Twitter, neither is TikTok. You don't own those entities. And if they decide to disappear, your way of communicating with your writer should not also disappear. So I will be honest and say that if you're doing a nonfiction book, you know, editors are going to be very cued into your social media. But as an agent, I have enough experience to know that somebody who has a really broad platform, maybe they have an email newsletter with 10,000 people, maybe they're the president of an organization with 30,000 people that will find their book relevant. I look for a more diverse platform. So yeah, unless there's something in the query that says I'm the biggest person on social media about X, I will check out their social media. Yeah, for sure. There are times when I'm looking for a particular type of person and I might go on social media to find that. So yeah, I mean, your social media is a part of who your identity is. I personally am not going to necessarily run to social media first unless there's something in your query letter that is insisting that I should. How do we find agents who have represented authors with similar titles and therefore would be a good fit for a book, but are not listed in the acknowledgments, etc., of those other published books? I think that there are 90% of authors acknowledge their agent in their acknowledgments, and if they don't, it's weird. It's saying something, to me, it's saying something about their relationship with their agent. So it's very rare that it's not listed in the acknowledgments. And I think it sends me a message if it's not. I have clients who I'm literally on their fifth, their sixth book, and they acknowledge me in every single thing in a different way. Because every book is its own thing, right? So I would be very surprised if an agent isn't in the acknowledgments, but you can go to Publishers Marketplace type in the name of a book and they will say, there's a whole section called Who Represents, and that will tell you who represents a particular book. But yeah, it's weird if they're not acknowledged in the book. Like many writers, I can revise endlessly. Yes. When you say we should have a finished manuscript before querying, what does this mean? A good first draft or an actual finished draft? I would say an actual finished draft, but I would also say drafts are never finished. So I think you want to get to the point where you finished, where you don't know where to go next. I would hope that you would have shared it with other writers. When you get to the point where I don't know where to go next, you share it with writers who open you up to a whole bunch of new possibilities or new concerns or new things for you to focus on, right? So, and be open to the fact that an agent's going to probably want to edit, and be certainly open to the fact that an editor is also going to contribute to the conversation. But I want you to get to the place where you are finished. You feel that you are finished. A good first draft. I mean, a good first draft is just the beginning of the revision process, right? Can you say something about how long it takes to hear back from an agent? Yeah, should we send a follow-up email after 1 month, 3 months, ever? And if so, what is the appropriate form of a follow-up? So there will be instructions on this on the agent's website. I think that on my website for my agency, we say, we'll write you, don't write us. I think that it's different if an agent, if you send a query according to the instructions to the agent's website, and they say, they might say, we'll be back to you in 3 months. Or if they say, well, I want to read more, I think that a month, if you've had a direct contact with an agent, right, you've sent this in blind, they have responded saying, this sounds interesting, I'd like to read more. I say that it's very fair for you to ask in a month if they have had the opportunity to read it. But if you're sending something in blindly, depending on what the instructions are, you probably will not ask them to follow up. You'll just move on, or you have sent it out to multiple people. Somebody recently asked my advice. They were doing query letters. They got 3. They were sending it out in a staggered way. So they sent it to one, and then they were, going to send it to more, which is totally acceptable to me. But one of the people in that list of agents they were sending out to said, I really like this. I want to read more. Well, I really like this and I want to read more. And so he asked me, well, what do I do now? Do I keep sending out to other agents? Do I tell the other agents that somebody is reading? What do I do? So what do you think I told him? Anybody have any guess? Yeah. So I said, let them read it, but keep doing what you're doing, right? Let them read it, be very gracious and excited, but keep on your path, because you have a list of 10 names that if you listen to me, you've researched and felt like you'd be really happy with any of those 10. So grabbing at the first one, putting all of your eggs in a basket over the first one doesn't quite make sense. Hi, cat. I saw your cat, Melanie. Putting, big girl. So putting all of your eggs in one basket is not a smart thing to do. So I said, oh, thank them, send it to them, but it ain't over until somebody calls you, And then he did that. And then the person said, I really like what I'm reading. Can I read exclusively can I have it exclusively for a short period of time? What do you think I told him? I'm so excited that you love it. I can't wait to talk to you more about it. I already have it with a couple of people, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, because it ain't over until you get a phone call, and it ain't over until you get an offer of representation. As I have begun my querying journey, I've noticed wide variety in what is requested. Just a letter, 5 pages, 10, 25, 50. Can you offer any insight into what motivates blah, 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 individual agents who request pages of whatever length to do versus only wanting a query? I imagine expediency and whether the writer is ready to be an author, as you framed it, or an artist. But I'm only guessing. Can I offer any insight into what motivates individual agents who request pages? I cannot. I wish I could. That's some kind of mind reading that would be lovely to have. I think we ask for 10 pages, and I think 10 pages give me enough room, but maybe you're an agent who really can invest time in reading 50. Maybe you're an agent who can invest time in reading 25. Maybe you're an agent who is super, super decisive and can get it from the query letter. One of my clients became the director of Vogue's website, right? Digital Vogue. And we were talking yesterday about this new job and who is she in relationship now with? Anna Wintour. And she said, the thing I will tell you about Anna Wintour is that she is absolutely decisive and she knows exactly what she wants. And that's how she operates, with complete confidence in every decision that she makes. Do you think Anna Wintour needs 50 pages? She does not, but that's who she is. Whereas somebody else might be more flexible or have the bandwidth. Rachel, do you want to jump in with your question? Feel free. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's less a question, more just maybe needing some encouragement because, and I probably other people need this too, but I love my book. I love it so much. I think it's great, but I am so uncomfortable, like selling myself and just using that language, talking about it in that way that I just how even when you were going through that PowerPoint and I was trying to draft something, I was just ugh, it turns me off so much to even attempt doing that, and I really just get stuck there.
Yeah, like I said, it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to make that mindset shift. But if you want to be an author, you just have to make that shift,
Yeah.
And it's something that you can just continue to practice and continue to think about. It's a distance that you need to acquire because and it's actually great that you're doing it at the query letter in your own private world, because then when you get a rejection from an agent, you're not rejecting Rachel. Right? Like when you're so closely aligned with your book that you can't step out of it to understand that it's a product, how will your ego and your mental health survive people rejecting it? It will not. So I'm saying acknowledge it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And keep practicing at it. Keep practicing at it because your goal is to have this book in other people's hands. It's not something for you to love. It's something for you to share. And so what do I need to take on? Who do I need to become that I have the confidence to share it with somebody else?
Would you for just kind of having that language, and the access to that kind of language, would you recommend, you said the queries kind of what's the back of the book kind of writing, or just is that material that I could do you think that's good material to read just to kind of have that kind of language in my head to kind of follow?
I think that every writer should first and foremost be a person who walks into bookstores, buys books, and reads them. I think that you cannot read enough, but it's more important than reading books. It's about walking into a bookstore, seeing where it's displayed, looking at covers, understanding what is appealing to me as a reader. And keep doing that, then you can more easily shift into understanding your book in that context, right? And reading the back cover copy of books or the flap copy of books is going to teach you, like, well, what's drawing people into this story? How did that work? You
Yeah.
know, if you're a writer, you should be someone who reads for the enjoyment, but there's a part in your head that should be reading and saying, how did they do? How did they do that? What were they trying to do there? That here, like reverse engineering some of these books. If you are a writer and you're learning how to be an author, follow authors who are doing it well. Not because you're going to mimic them, but you're learning that this is a process and you're seeing how the process works over and over again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do that. I read a lot from my library. I have two little kids, so I don't get to do, but I like that. That sounds really nice to just walk through a bookstore with that mentality of like thinking about how books are being sold. And, sounds like a nice date with myself.
It is. It is.
So I'm
Thank you
conscious of
so much.
time.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to
Uh,
jump in and say we have about 8 minutes left.
Okay. What is the best way to understand the publishing landscape, for example, a division of Simon Schuster and imprint of, okay, what's that question about in the context of a query letter? Because I think that you've already moved on to another part of the elephant and you haven't chewed the first part of the elephant. So this conversation is about the query letter. And I think you're jumping to a division of Simon and Schuster. Doesn't matter for you in this context. It will matter later. And hopefully you will have an agent you will have an agent, not hopefully, you will have an agent who is articulate about all of those things and will break them down in terms that are relevant to you. Should we stick with US agents or query UK agents? I would stick to US agents. Yeah, I would stick to US agents. There's more probably behind that question. Will you please talk a little bit about the editorial revision process you go through with a new author you've taken on as a client? Thank you. Now, I'm a very bad example of this because I was an editor for 20 years and you can take a girl out of a publishing house, but you can't take the editor out of the girl, whatever, however the phrase is, right? I edit everything. Ask my children, they're 13 and they're 15. Their dread is handing me an essay that they're working on, right? I edit everything because that is like breathing to me. And I love that relationship with words. And so with me, I do a lot of editing, I'm very much like in there from the very beginning, different ways. Like with Sadiqa Johnson, she every 2 years or so, a year and a half, she says, I'm ready. And I'm like, okay. And we set 2 hours, we set an appointment for 2 hours, and she literally tells me a whole story, mostly from beginning to the end on the phone. And I'll ask her some questions and I'll suggest some things. And then she'll come back with an outline and then we'll talk again and we're from the beginning. With someone like Tia Williams, she'll write an entire book and save the last 3 chapters and have me read them. And she's like, I don't know how to end this book. I never know how to end a book, Cherise. So let's talk about that. So we do that. With an author like, I did a book called America Goddamn, which was about the history of violence in America against Black women. And she is a professor at the University of Ohio, and she wrote the entire book. But I read the draft before she sent it to the author. I am a very editorial agent, and some authors need that. Some authors want that. Other authors don't. My partner, Wendy Sherman, she grew up in like the rights part of publishing, so she always sold books in sales, etc. So she doesn't have that editing spirit. She's a really good reader, and she knows what people like, and she will read a manuscript and say, this didn't resonate with me, but she's not going to line edit anything because that's the type of editor she is. So my editorial revision process with an author is very in-depth, but all agents are not like that, and that's okay too. How do you find comparable books? Google has never worked for me. Should you include your website address? Yes, you should include your website address. Bookstores are where you find comp titles for sure. And you know who is like magical about comp titles? librarians. Librarians know everything. So walking into a library, walking into an independent bookstore, not Barnes and Noble, no shade against Barnes and Noble or Target or Walmart or wherever you get your books, but those are not people who are booksellers. They sell stuff, and books are one of the stuff they sell. Whereas an independent bookseller sells books and has like a more in-depth knowledge. But if you really want somebody who knows all of the things, it's a librarian. I think we did all of them, right? Did we? I think we answered all the questions. Wow.
May
This has been amazing.
I just interrupt one little bit and say two things of announcement before we really officially thank Cherise for a fabulous program today. Obviously, I'm guessing people are here because they already know about the Right Angles Conference, but Right Angles Conference is happening April 6th. March 10th, 6 to 8 p.m. is the first virtual open mic that Straw Dog is launching. You can find information on the website, which I will put in the chat. And on April 20th in Springfield, at Make It Springfield, editor Jean Zimmer is going to talk with people about polishing our manuscripts and trying to get them into the ready form before you send off your query letters. So a nice follow-up to this. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Becky. Yes, please do put in the Straw Dogs link. I put in the right, there we go. I put in the Right Angles link. Cherise, I can't thank you enough. I've been to many sessions like this, and this has been the most not just informative, but humane. And
I love that. I love that, Julie.
yeah, so thank you so much. And some of you will have the great pleasure of meeting Cherise again in your agent meetings in a few weeks. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Remember that
much.
it's all possible. It's a long road, but it's possible. And I can't wait to see what you are going to contribute to the world.
Thank you,
so
Cherise.
much.
Thank you.
Honestly, thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I felt very secure with you at the helm, and I'm so glad you reminded me about the announcements because I totally forgot. So
Well, thank you. It was what a great program. So
yeah, she was great.
all right.
All right, take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.